Welcome to the Guide to Researching Civil War Graves, Part 2. I'm Johnny Anderson, Chief Researcher with the Civil War Project. In this video, we'll look at ways to leverage research tools to determine whether someone is a Civil War veteran or not. If you completed Part 1 of the research guide, you should have a spreadsheet that lists each of your potential veterans. If not, that's okay. We'll use 3 men and research them. That way you'll get a sense of the process so you can adapt it to your own project. First, let's take a look at the research map, though, so you kind of get a sense of the process and the tools that we're going to be using. Starting at the top on the left, Findagrave, we've already used that in Part 1 by looking at birth and death dates to create our list of potential veterans that were born between 1790 and 1850. In the research phase, we're going to be looking at Findagrave to see if that particular person has a military headstone. That's going to be a big clue for us. Secondly, we're going to be looking at Ancestry.com to see if that individual is in a family tree. And we're going to do that for a couple of reasons. One is we need to find out where they were living at the beginning of the conflict. So we'll do that by looking at 2 things. One is the 1860 census to see where they were living in 1860, just before the conflict. And we'll look at birth or marriage records if there's no 1860 census associated with them. Next, we'll be looking at for clues in Ancestry that will give us an indication that someone is a veteran or not. Ancestry has their own list of digitized Civil War records that can be attached to a person and family tree. They also have digitized pension applications from both the soldier and widows, so that'll give us a head start of what unit we may be looking for. And lastly, if there's not a record in one of the national databases, Ancestry has digitized state military militia records for a number of states that we'll be able to look at to see if the individual was a member of a state militia. Once we've got that information, we're going to move into Fold3. Fold3 has the digitized U.S. Archives combined military service records. And that's really the gold standard that we'll use to determine if someone is a veteran or not. 2 other options that are free is FamilySearch.org has a U.S. Civil War Soldiers Index, and the National Park Service has their Soldiers and Sailors database. A lot of those are have duplicated information from the Fold3 CMSR, but you're not going to get as much detail. Fold3 actually lets you look at the record to see how they signed, what age they were, and where they lived at the time that they enlisted. And then lastly, for the non-indexed, non-digitized research tools are family histories that you may have in an old family Bible or just from stories that live in the family. Local museums, because a lot of the Civil War units were recruited locally, and museums sometimes have the unit muster rolls for those. And at the state and local libraries have also unit muster rolls, as well as some universities have Civil War research centers. So with that, we're going to pick 3 individuals to research that have different levels of attributes associated with them that are going to tell us whether they're a Civil War veteran or not. For our first example, let's look at John Bunyan Barclay. Was born in 1847, died in 1926, and is buried in the Granger City Cemetery. 1847, he was pretty young if he was going to be a veteran. And the first clue that we've got in this, we're going to start with the easiest one, is he's got a military headstone. And there's a note on his record. It says J.B. Barclay, Company I, 17th Texas Infantry. So we know there's a pretty good chance that he's a veteran. As a matter of fact, using the Civil War veteran scoring model that we developed, that's enough to give him enough points to make him a veteran. But let's look at some of the other records that he's got. If we search for John Bunyan Barclay in Ancestry, we'll notice that he's in a number of family trees, but this one happens to have the most records in it. And there's a couple of things that we want to look at. First, we want to look at 1860 and see where he was living. John Bunyan Barclay, age 12, was living in Bastrop, Texas. So we know he was a Texas veteran, and so we'll look in the Fold3 Texas records. A little farther down, we'll see that there is a pension application for him. So this was a widow's pension application, and his widow, Martha Barclay, knew that he was an infantry private, but that's about all she knew. So, but that's another good indicator that that John Bunyan Barclay is in fact a Civil War veteran. And here's his application for his headstone: CSA, 17th Texas Infantry, Company I. And so we've got three indicators already that he's a veteran: his headstone, the pension application, and headstone application. Let's look at one other: 1910 census. In 1910, the census enumerators were instructed to ask any male that was over the age of 50 whether they were a Civil War veteran or not. And if we look in this case, we will see John Bunyan Barclay was living with his son and his family at the time in Granger. That's where he was buried. And this field right here would say CA if he was a Confederate Army veteran, UA if he's a Union Army veteran, UN for Navy, and CN for Navy. We see there's nothing there, but we know that he was a veteran. So the 1910 census is only an indicator. It is so unreliable. Enumerators did not always ask that question. And in this case, obviously, he was either not home or they didn't ask the question. But we've got some pretty good indicators. Let's go see if we can find him in the Fold3 database. We know what unit he was in. So if we move over to Fold3, we are going to search in the Texas records. So we're going to go into the Confederate Texas records, and we're going to start with the best match, John B. Barclay. Nothing there. Next, we'll go to John Barclay. Again, nothing there. And then last, as was the custom of the time, many men only used their initials. There he is, J.B. Barclay. And there it is. He says it's a private in Company I of the 17th Texas Infantry. Many times there are more than one page that you can look to see where they enlisted and what age they were. In this case, there was only one page for J.B. Barclay. So we're reasonably sure that he's a veteran. We've got the headstone, we've got the widow's pension application, we've got the headstone application, we've got a good match, not an excellent match, but a good match for the name on in the CMSR. So we can be reasonably sure that John Bunyan Barclay is a veteran. For our next example, let's take a look at Austin Cunningham Ayton, who was born in 1832 in Ohio, died in 1924 in Round Rock, Texas. And in this case, we got a nice portrait of Austin, but don't have a military headstone. The bio on his Findagrave page, memorial, says he was educated in Peoria County, Illinois, and became a minister in Elmore, Illinois in 1854. So it's a good indication that he was in Ohio, but let's go check. So if we search for Austin and Cunningham, Ayton in Ancestry.com, this record has this family tree has the most records associated with it. There's a couple of things that we can look for. There's the 1860 census, and it says, in fact, in 1860 he lived in Millbrook and Peoria County, Illinois. So if he was a veteran, he was probably a Union veteran. Farther down, we can look to see there is actually a Civil War record for him. So if we look at that, it says Austin C. Ayton, Union, Illinois, 77th Regiment, Illinois Infantry, Company I, and he was a private when he went in, and when he came out, he was a corporal. And thirdly, we have a 1910 census because he lived after 1910. So we looked at that last time, and it wasn't a very reliable indicator, but in this case, Austin C. Ayton says UA, he was in the Union Army. So we've probably got a pretty good indicator that he was in the Union Army in Illinois. Let's go take a look at Fold3. So if we look at Fold3, we searched for Austin C. Ayton, and sure enough came up as a private going in, coming out as a corporal, Company I of the 77th Illinois Infantry. So in this case, we had an exact match of Austin C. Ayton, and so we've got some really good indicators that he was, in fact, a Civil War veteran. This one was actually pretty easy. We had a great indication of where he lived. We had a Civil War record on Ancestry. We had a 1910 census indicator, and we had a Fold3 indicator. So with pretty good certainty, we can say that Austin Cunningham Ayton was a Union Army Civil War veteran. So for our third example, let's take a look at Aaron A. Seymour. Was born in 1839, died in 1913, and is buried in the Andice Cemetery in Andice, Texas. First glance, we can tell that there's not a military headstone, and there's no designation on his memorial that he was a Civil War veteran, so we're really going to have to start from scratch. So let's go to Ancestry.com, and we can find that he's in a number of family trees. This one happens to have the most records that are associated with it. So we're looking for where he lived in 1860 with the 1860 census. We're looking for any Civil War records. In this case, we have neither. It's not an 1860 census, and there are no Civil War records attached to his family tree. But we can go over here and look to see, in 1859, he married Sarah Elizabeth Donnell, another one of the pioneer families in Williamson County, at the age of 20. So there's a pretty good likelihood that at the beginning of the war, he was living in Williamson County, Texas. So with that, we've got a 1910 census. So let's go take a quick look at the 1910 census. We didn't have much luck in one of the other ones, but if we take a look at this, we can see there is next to Aaron Seymour, there is a CA, which means he reported that he was a Confederate Army veteran. While the negative doesn't say anything, is not a good indicator. If there is nothing there, it doesn't mean they're not a veteran. The positive, if there's a CA, CN, UA, or UN, it's a good indicator that they're a veteran of the Civil War. So with that, we just need to go find what unit Aaron served with. We know he lived in Texas. We know he lived in Williamson County. So let's search for Aaron Seymour. We're going to start with the best match, first name, middle initial, last name. We've got nothing. Going to go with first name, last name. Again, no results. The Fold3 search engine is not very forgiving. So let's A.A. Seymour. We've got some Seymours here, but there's not an AA and there's not an Aaron. So we're not having much luck. Let's switch over to the National Park Service database and look to see if we can find anything here. We're going to do Aaron A. Seymour. We know he was probably a Confederate, and we know he was in Texas. Not many folks there, so we're not coming up with much results here. So let's go back to his record, and one of the things we can look at is there are alternative spellings for his name. Instead of S-E-Y-M-O-U-R, there's an S-E-Y-M-O-O-R. So let's go back and look to see if we can find a misspelling. So if we go Aaron, S-E-Y-M-O-O-R, we got nothing. Ah! Look, we've got him, Aaron A. Seymour with an alternative spelling. And if we look to see, this is Aaron A. Seymour, Company D, 30th Texas Cavalry, was a corporal. In this case, we've got more than one page. So we can look to see that he enlisted in 1863, and the important thing is he enlisted in Georgetown, so that's the county seat of Williamson County. So we've got an A. Seymour in Williamson County, close to where he was living, and was enlisted by S.M. Stray. That's actually Samuel M. Strayhorn, who raised Company D of the 30th Texas Cavalry in Williamson County. So this is another good indicator that Aaron is a Civil War veteran. One note is that it always helps for the specific geography that you're looking for, or where a specific cemetery is located, to understand what units were raised in that area. In Williamson County's case, there was the 27th Brigade of the Texas State Troops, which was a militia unit, so you'll see that a lot. There was Company D of the 30th Cavalry that Samuel Strayhorn raised, and Samuel Strayhorn is buried in the Granger Cemetery, one of the other examples that we looked at earlier. And Company C of the 7th Texas Cavalry was the Williamson County Grays. And so if you see people that show those designations, there's a great likelihood that they're veterans, and they're the ones that you're looking for. So in this case, we've got a good match for a misspelling, but a proximity to where he lived. And we got a 1910 census that said he was a Civil War veteran. So we've got really good indicators for that Aaron Seymour was a Civil War veteran. So I hope this has helped you out. You've got a good insight that we really start from Findagrave with the information that we've got from Findagrave. We go to Ancestry.com and look for family tree information, indicators that they were in the Civil War through Civil War records or pension applications. or the location where they were lived at the start of the conflict. And then move to Fold3 or Family Search or the National Park Service Soldiers and Sailors database to find any Civil War records that exist. So with that process and those digitized databases, give you a lot of good tools to use on your project to determine who's a Civil War veteran and who's not. So thank you for listening. If you like the content, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe to our channel. And we'll move into part 3, which will be how do you locate the Civil War veterans' graves in the cemetery. Thanks a lot.